My own family tried to destroy my life by submitting a fabricated espionage report to the Pentagon. They thought they were exposing a fraud and ruining my career. Instead, they unknowingly summoned a federal investigator who took one look at my classified file, smiled, and turned my in-laws' malicious trap into their absolute worst nightmare. To understand how I ended up sitting across from a federal agent who held my entire life in a manila envelope, you have to understand the toxic ecosystem of my wife's family. My name is David Sterling. For the last 9 years, I have worked as a senior systems architect for a major defense contractor in the Dulles Technology Corridor of Northern Virginia. Because of the nature of my work, I hold a top secret, SCI, Sensitive Compartmented Information Clearance, padded with a few special access programs that I legally cannot name. To maintain this clearance, my life is an open book to the United States government. My finances, my travel, my associates, my internet search history, everything is continuously monitored and vetted. The trade-off is a very comfortable salary, excellent benefits, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I am building systems that keep the country safe. But to my brother-in-law, Richard Caldwell, and my mother-in-law, Evelyn, I was a deeply suspicious, arrogant fraud. Richard was the family's golden boy, despite a track record that proved the exact opposite. He was a serial entrepreneur whose businesses only ever existed on glossy business cards and hastily built WordPress sites. He had burned through his inheritance, half of Evelyn's retirement savings, and whatever goodwill he had left in the local business community. He was 36, 2 years older than me, and utterly consumed by jealousy over the life my wife, Chloe, and I had built. Chloe and I lived in a beautiful, 4-bedroom colonial in Fairfax. We drove nice cars, we took quiet, unassuming vacations. But because I could never talk about what I actually did for a living, Richard's resentment metastasized into full-blown conspiracy theories. "So, what is it you actually do, Dave?" Richard would ask at every family gathering, swirling a glass of expensive scotch he hadn't paid for. Because I look at Lockheed, Northrop, all those guys, and they don't pay 4-bedroom in Fairfax money to IT guys, not unless you're skimming. "I'm not an IT guy, Richard," I would reply calmly, using the same deflecting phrases I'd been trained to use. "I do systems integration, government contracts. It's mostly paperwork and endless meetings." "Right, paperwork," Richard would sneer, exchanging a knowing glance with Evelyn. "You know, my buddy works in crypto. He says the only guys in tech making your kind of money who won't talk about their jobs are usually doing something highly illegal on the dark web, or embezzling." Evelyn would invariably chime in, her tone dripping with passive-aggressive concern. "We just worry about Chloe, David. That's all. We don't want her implicated when, well, you know, when the house of cards falls." The breaking point arrived on Thanksgiving. Richard had cornered me in the kitchen after dinner. He was launching his newest guaranteed unicorn startup, an AI-driven real estate app that sounded completely nonsensical, and he needed $100,000 in seed money. "I can't do it, Richard," I told him flatly. "Even if I had that kind of liquid cash sitting around, which I don't, my finances are heavily scrutinized. I can't just wire $100,000 to an LLC with zero revenue history. It would trigger a massive red flag with my security office." Richard's face went red. The alcohol he'd been nursing all afternoon finally dissolved his remaining filter. "Bullshit! You're lying to me. You've got offshore accounts, Dave." "I know you do. I've seen your bank statements." I froze. "Excuse me? You've seen what?" He realized he'd slipped up, but he doubled down, stepping into my personal space. "Last time you hosted a barbecue, I went into your home office looking for a pen. Found your little locked filing cabinet. The key was right in your desk drawer, you idiot. You're moving money around like a cartel boss. Who the hell makes wire transfers to the Cayman Islands and Switzerland?" My blood ran cold, not from guilt, but from the sheer, horrifying realization of his ignorance and intrusion. What he had seen were not my personal finances. He had seen printed transaction ledgers related to international procurement for Project Chimera, a highly classified aerospace initiative. I had brought them home in a secure, tamper-evident briefcase, locked them in a GSA-approved safe, and he had somehow bypassed the secondary lock, thinking he was uncovering my personal secrets. "Richard, If you looked at the documents in that safe, you have committed a federal crime, I whispered, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. You need to leave, right now. Or what? He spat, jabbing a finger into my chest. You'll call your imaginary mob bosses? You're a fake, Dave. You're laundering money, and I'm not going to let you drag my sister down when you get caught. I kicked him out. Chloe backed me up entirely, furious at her brother's snooping. Evelyn left in tears, screaming that I was destroying her family to protect my criminal enterprise. We went no contact with them the very next day. For 3 months, it was blissful silence. Chloe and I enjoyed our lives without the constant barrage of toxic accusations. I dove deep into my work. We were entering the final integration phase of Project Chimera, and I was pulling 60-hour weeks inside a windowless SCIF, sensitive compartmented information facility. I thought the worst was behind us. I thought cutting them off was the end of the drama. I had vastly underestimated the depths of Richard's vindictive nature. Having been denied my money and humiliated by being kicked out of my home, he and Evelyn had spent those 3 months compiling a dossier on me. And then, in an act of breathtaking malice, they mailed it directly to the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency, DCSA, and the FBI, utilizing the anonymous whistleblower hotlines designed to catch rogue agents and traitors. They didn't just accuse me of financial crimes. To ensure the government took it seriously, Richard completely fabricated a narrative that I was acting erratically, expressing anti-American sentiments behind closed doors, and meeting with foreign nationals at odd hours of the night. They lit a match and tossed it into my life, expecting my world to burn. It was a Tuesday morning in mid-March. I was deep inside SCIF Room 4, staring at a schematic for a hypersonic thermal shielding unit, trying to figure out why the telemetry data wasn't matching our simulations. The air conditioning in the SCIF was set to its usual freezing temperature, the constant hum of the secure servers acting as white noise. The heavy steel vault door to the room clanged open. Brenda Hopkins, our facility security officer, FSO, stepped inside. Brenda was a terrifying, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had spent 20 years in military intelligence before moving to the private sector. Usually, she only interrupted work for fire drills or if someone accidentally brought a smartwatch into the secure zone. But today, Brenda looked pale. Her jaw was set tight. "David," she said, her voice echoing slightly against the soundproofed walls. "Step away from the terminal. I need you in my office. Now." "Give me 2 minutes to log out and secure the drive," I said, reaching for my keyboard. "No," Brenda barked. "Step away now. Security Protocol Alpha. Someone else will secure your station. Follow me." My stomach dropped into my shoes. Protocol Alpha. That meant an immediate suspension of access. In my 9 years here, I had only seen Protocol Alpha used once, when an engineer was escorted out of the building in handcuffs by federal agents for attempting to smuggle source code on a thumb drive. I stood up, my mind racing through every email, every interaction, every piece of code I had touched in the last year. Had I spilled classified information? Had I accidentally accessed a compartment I wasn't cleared for? I followed Brenda out of the SCIF, down the long, sterile hallway, and into her corner office. Sitting in the chair opposite Brenda's desk was a man I had never seen before. He was built like a linebacker, wearing a sharply tailored gray suit that did little to hide the holster bulge under his left arm. He had close-cropped salt-and-pepper hair and eyes that looked like they had seen the worst parts of humanity and found them incredibly boring. "David Sterling," Brenda said, her tone formal and rigid. "This is Special Agent Bradley Harrison with the DCSA. He is here to conduct an unscheduled, urgent interview regarding your clearance status." Agent Harrison stood up, but he didn't offer his hand. He just stared at me. "Have a seat, Mr. Sterling." I sat. My palms were sweating. "Is there a problem, Agent Harrison? Has there been a breach?" Harrison slowly opened a thick, red manila folder on Brenda's desk. "Mr. Sterling, holding a top-secret clearance is a privilege, not a right. It requires absolute transparency. When an individual goes to great lengths to conceal their activities, their finances, and their loyalties, the United States government takes immediate, corrective action." "I haven't concealed anything," I said. my voice rising defensively. Everything I do is on the grid. Brenda has my life laid out in her files. Brenda has what you want her to have. Harrison countered smoothly, pulling a stack of papers from the red folder. What Brenda didn't have was this: a highly detailed, corroborated report from multiple concerned citizens close to you, detailing a pattern of severe, disqualifying behavior. My mind blanked. Concerned citizens? What are you talking about? Harrison adjusted his glasses. Let's start with the financials. You claim a net income of approximately $240,000 a year. Yet, we have reports that you possess a hidden filing cabinet containing offshore wire transfers to the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. Millions of dollars, Mr. Sterling. The report alleges you are laundering illicit funds. It hit me like a physical blow. The Thanksgiving argument. Richard, wait, I stammered, a mix of pure relief and boiling anger washing over me. Are you talking about, did my brother-in-law submit this? Richard Caldwell? Harrison's expression remained stone cold. The sources of these allegations are protected, Mr. Sterling, but let's continue. The report states you have become increasingly paranoid, isolating your wife from her family to prevent them from discovering your activities. It claims you frequently leave the house in the middle of the night to take untraceable phone calls. Because I'm on call for the European testing facility, I practically shouted, leaning forward. Agent Harrison, this is insane. My brother-in-law is a bitter, broke narcissist. He broke into my home office, found my secure transit bag, and looked at procurement ledgers for Project Chimera. He thought they were my personal bank statements because he's an idiot. Brenda flinched at the mention of the project name. Harrison didn't blink. The report also details, Harrison continued, ignoring my outburst completely, that you have expressed extreme anti-government sentiments, that you told your family, and I quote, the DOD is a joke and I'm bleeding them dry. I have never said that in my life, it claims. Harrison pressed on, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous, that your sudden influx of wealth is tied to selling proprietary aerospace schematics to a third party. The informant provided dates of your so-called vacations to Geneva and London last year, suggesting they were handoff meetings. Those were authorized trips. I looked at Brenda, pleading. Brenda, you cleared my travel. You know I went to London for a friend's wedding, and you ran the counter-intel brief on me before and after. Brenda looked at her hands. David, when a report comes in with this much specific detail, dates, times, financial references, DCSA protocol mandates, we treat it as credible until proven otherwise. We have to follow the process. I felt the walls closing in. This was how they did it. Richard and Evelyn didn't need to prove anything. They just needed to throw enough mud at the wall to trigger a bureaucratic nightmare. Even if I cleared my name, an investigation like this could take months. My clearance would be suspended. I'd be pulled off Project Chimera. My career momentum would hit a brick wall, all because a jealous man-child couldn't handle his own failures. Agent Harrison, I said, forcing my voice to steady. I am telling you, under penalty of perjury, that every word in that document is a fabricated lie designed to ruin me out of personal spite. I will give you full access to my personal bank accounts right now. Call my wife. She will tell you the exact same thing. Harrison leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against the red folder. The silence in the room was suffocating. He stared at me for a long, agonizing minute, his eyes scanning my face for any micro-expression of deception. Then, very slowly, a strange expression crossed Agent Harrison's face. The harsh, interrogator's mask slipped, replaced by something entirely different. He looked down at the paper in his hand. Then he looked at Brenda. Miss Hopkins, Harrison said quietly, could you step out of your own office for a moment? I need to speak with Mr. Sterling alone. Skiff-level privacy. Brenda looked surprised, but she nodded, standing up and swiftly exiting the room, ensuring the heavy door locked behind her. Harrison and I were alone. He tossed the report onto the desk in front of me. I know it's a lie, David, Harrison said, his voice completely devoid of the aggressive edge he'd used a moment ago. I exhaled a breath I felt like I'd been holding for an hour. You do? Of course I do. Harrison scoffed, picking up the red folder again. Because before I came down here to play bad cop, I actually pulled your real file. I pulled the master file." Harrison opened the folder, and for the first time, I saw what was inside. It wasn't just my standard SF-86 background check. Stamped across the top in bold, blue lettering was a code word I recognized immediately. It was the highest-level security compartment for Project Chimera. "David," Harrison said, leaning forward, a sharp, predatory smile forming on his lips, "your brother-in-law made a very, very stupid mistake. He didn't just file a false report. By detailing exactly what he saw in your home office, he accidentally admitted in writing to a federal agency that he committed espionage against a special access program." Harrison closed the folder with a loud smack. "And I," Harrison whispered, "am the agent in charge of investigating leaks for Project Chimera. Let's talk about how we're going to handle Richard." I stared at Agent Harrison, my brain struggling to process the sheer magnitude of the pivot that had just occurred. A minute ago, my career was effectively over. Now, the lead investigator for the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency was sitting across from me, treating me like an asset rather than a suspect. "Let me get this completely straight," I said, leaning forward and lowering my voice instinctively, even though we were in a soundproof vault. "Richard put the details of the procurement ledgers in his whistleblower complaint? He actually described the project?" Harrison nodded, his expression hardening into cold, professional calculation. "In excruciating detail, David. He thought he was describing shell companies and money laundering fronts. But what he actually described, with terrifying accuracy, were the classified funding structures for the thermal shielding components of Project Chimera. He named the dummy corporations we use for procurement. He named the transit routing numbers. He put it all in a signed, notarized affidavit to the FBI, thinking it made him look like a hero." I rubbed my temples, a mix of profound relief and creeping horror washing over me. "He's an absolute moron." "He is," Harrison agreed flatly. "But he is a moron who has bypassed a secondary locking mechanism on a GSA-approved safe containing SAP-level materials. That elevates him from a domestic nuisance to a national security threat. My problem, David, is containment. I need to know exactly how much he saw. More importantly, I need to know if he copied anything. Did he take photos? Did he write down the account numbers? Because if those details leak to the wrong foreign intelligence service, the entire financial architecture of this defense program is compromised." "I don't know," I admitted. "He's erratic. When I caught him, he just started yelling about offshore accounts. He didn't mention taking pictures." Harrison stood up and began pacing the small office. "We can't just raid his house. If we kick his door in and he has those photos on a cloud drive, he might panic and hit publish. Or worse, he might try to sell them to someone he thinks is a corporate competitor, not realizing he's dealing with foreign assets. We need to lock him down, and we need him to confess exactly what he has before he realizes he's the target." Harrison stopped and looked at me, his eyes locked onto mine. "I need your help, David. We need to set a trap, and we need your wife on board." The drive home that evening was the longest of my life. My clearance hadn't been suspended, but I was placed on administrative leave for the next 48 hours while the operation was put into motion. When I walked through the front door of our Fairfax home, Chloe was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with a rhythmic, aggressive force. She took one look at my pale face and dropped the knife. "Dave? What happened? Did they fire you?" I pulled her into the living room, checked to make sure the windows were closed, and told her everything. I told her about the complaint, the fabricated allegations of treason, and the fact that her brother had just accidentally confessed to a felony under the Espionage Act. Chloe sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of betrayal and absolute fury. "My own mother," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. "Evelyn co-signed this? She helped him write it?" "She corroborated his claims about my erratic behavior," I said gently. "Chloe, the DCSA is involved now. The FBI is involved. Harrison wants to set up a controlled confrontation. He wants us to invite Richard and Evelyn over under the guise of me surrendering. We need to make Richard brag about what he stole so the feds can record the confession and seize his devices before he can delete or upload anything. Chloe looked down at her hands. I could see the internal war raging inside her. This was her family. No matter how toxic, how destructive they were, turning them over to federal agents was a massive line to cross. Then, she looked up, and the hesitation in her eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, diamond-hard resolve. "Richard tried to send you to federal prison, Dave," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "He tried to destroy our lives because he couldn't get a handout. Tell Agent Harrison we are in, whatever he needs." The next morning, the trap was set. Under Harrison's strict guidance, Chloe called Evelyn. She played the part perfectly, crying, hysterical, playing the role of the broken wife who had finally seen the truth. "Mom!" Chloe sobbed into the phone as Agent Harrison, and 2 technicians sat in our living room monitoring the call. "You were right. The feds came to Dave's office today. He's suspended. He's terrified. He wants to make a deal with Richard. He wants to pay him off to retract the complaint before they dig deeper." On speakerphone, we could hear Evelyn gasp, followed immediately by a sickeningly triumphant sigh. "Oh, my poor Chloe. I told you, sweetie. I told you he was dirty. We're just trying to protect you. I'll call Richard right now. We'll come over tonight. Don't let David leave the house." When the call ended, Agent Harrison gave Chloe a rare, genuine smile. "You missed your calling in Hollywood, Mrs. Sterling." By 5 p.m., our house had been quietly transformed. DCSA tech agents, posing as a landscaping crew, had discreetly slipped through the back gate. They wired our dining room with high-definition audio and video recorders, hidden in the crown molding and behind the drapery. Agent Harrison and a secondary agent named Miller set up a command post in my locked basement office, tapping directly into the feeds. "Remember the objective," Harrison told me over the secure earpiece they had molded to fit invisibly inside my ear canal. "Do not get angry. Play the defeated man. Stroke his ego. Richard is a narcissist. He won't be able to resist gloating. We need him to state clearly how he bypassed the safe, and crucially, we need to know if he has photographs. Once we have that, you say the safe word. I guess I have no leverage." Then we end it. At 6:30 middags, the doorbell rang. I opened the door, deliberately letting my shoulders slump and avoiding eye contact. Richard strutted over the threshold like a conquering Roman general, wearing a designer suit he definitely couldn't afford and a smirk that made my blood boil. Evelyn trailed behind him, clutching her purse, looking around our foyer with an air of vindicated superiority. "Dave," Richard said, clapping me hard on the shoulder. It was a demeaning, aggressive gesture. "Rough day at the office? Let's just get this over with, Richard," I mumbled, leading them into the dining room. Chloe was sitting at the table, a balled-up tissue in her hand, staring blankly at the wall. Evelyn rushed over to her, wrapping her arms around her daughter. "It's going to be okay, Chloe. We'll get you a good divorce lawyer. You won't have to carry any of his debt." Chloe didn't look at her. She just nodded stiffly. I had never loved my wife more than in that exact moment. Richard took a seat at the head of my dining table, leaning back and lacing his fingers behind his head. "So, the invincible David Sterling finally hits a wall. I told you they'd look into you, Dave. You think the government doesn't care about a guy washing cartel money in the Cayman Islands?" "Stay calm," Harrison's voice murmured in my earpiece. "Let him dig the hole." "It's not cartel money, Richard," I said, keeping my voice shaky, "and you have no idea what you've done. I'm facing a massive investigation. You have to call the hotline back and tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you misread the documents." Richard laughed. It was a loud, grating sound. "Retract it? Are you out of your mind? I'm a registered whistleblower, buddy. There's a reward program for this kind of thing. A percentage of whatever they seize from you." "There's no money to seize," I pleaded, leaning over the table. "Richard, please. How did you even see those ledgers?" "They were in a locked GSA-approved safe. The key was in my desk, but the dial lock." "How did you bypass the dial lock?" Richard rolled his eyes, taking the bait effortlessly. "Dave, your dial lock is a joke. It's a standard S&G mechanical. You leave the combination written on a post-it note under your keyboard like a boomer. I found the key, spun the dial, and boom. Open sesame. Violation of physical security confirmed, Harrison whispered in my ear. Keep pushing. Get to the data. Okay, I swallowed hard, acting desperate. Okay, fine. You looked at them. But you don't have proof. It's your word against mine. If you retract the complaint, I can say it was a misunderstanding. Richard's smirk vanished, replaced by a dark, malicious sneer. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on my mahogany table. You really think I'm that stupid, Dave? He asked softly. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his iPhone, tapping the screen and sliding it across the table toward me. My heart pounded. On the screen was a crystal-clear, high-resolution photograph of a heavily redacted procurement ledger. The red top secret, SCI, Chimera stamp at the top of the page was perfectly visible. Bingo, Harrison said in my ear. The tension in his voice was palpable. We have him. Ask about distribution. You took pictures, I whispered, staring at the phone. Richard, do you have any idea what this is? I know exactly what it is, Richard snapped. It's proof. I took photos of all 12 pages. They're backed up to my personal iCloud, and I have a copy on a flash drive in my glove box outside. So don't even think about trying to smash my phone. Evelyn chimed in, her voice dripping with venom. He has you, David. You need to do what's right. You need to compensate Richard for the emotional distress you've caused this family, and you need to sign the house over to Chloe. It was extortion. Pure, unadulterated extortion, layered on top of a massive federal crime. How much? I asked, looking dead into Richard's eyes. $250,000, Richard said without missing a beat. Wired to my LLC by tomorrow morning. You do that, and I tell the FBI I had a change of heart. I delete the photos. We all walk away. I looked at Chloe. She gave me a nearly imperceptible nod. I took a deep breath, looking back at my brother-in-law, letting the facade of the broken man fall away completely. I straightened my posture. Well, Richard, I said, my voice cold and steady, I guess I have no leverage. For a split second, Richard looked confused by the sudden change in my tone. Before he could speak, the heavy oak door leading from the hallway to the basement burst open. Agent Harrison stepped into the dining room, followed instantly by Agent Miller and two uniformed federal officers who had been waiting outside the back door. Harrison was no longer playing the polite interviewer. His badge was prominently displayed on his belt, and his hand rested casually near his sidearm. Evelyn screamed, dropping her purse. Richard shot up from his chair, his face draining of all color. What the hell is this? Dave, who are these people? Federal agents, Mr. Caldwell, Harrison barked, his voice echoing off the walls with terrifying authority. Do not move your hands. Step away from the table. Wait, no, you're here for him, Richard yelled, pointing a trembling finger at me. He's the one laundering money. I'm the whistleblower. I filed the report. Harrison walked slowly toward the table, picking up Richard's iPhone. He looked at the screen, confirming the photograph of the classified document, and then slipped the phone into a static-shielded Faraday bag. We received your report, Mr. Caldwell, Harrison said smoothly, and we investigated it thoroughly. The documents you photographed do not belong to a cartel. They belong to the United States Department of Defense. They are classified top secret, under a special access program. Richard froze. The arrogant swagger evaporated, replaced by the stark, humiliating realization of his own profound ignorance. What are you talking about? You didn't uncover a money laundering ring, Richard, I said, standing up. You broke into a federal safe and photographed classified military procurement data, and then you tried to extort a cleared defense contractor. Agent Miller, Harrison said, not taking his eyes off Richard. Miller stepped forward, handcuffs rattling in his grip. Richard Caldwell, you are under arrest for violations of 18 U.S. Code Section 793, gathering, transmitting, or losing defense information, as well as federal extortion. Place your hands behind your back. Mom! Richard shrieked, his voice cracking like a terrified child's as Miller spun him around and locked the cuffs onto his wrists. Mom! Do something! Evelyn was backed against the wall, hyperventilating, her eyes darting frantically between me, Chloe, and the agents. "Chloe, Chloe, tell them to stop! He's your brother!" Chloe stood up. She walked around the table, stopping just a few feet from her mother. The room fell dead silent, save for Richard's pathetic whimpering. "You tried to destroy my husband, Mom," Chloe said, her voice eerily calm. "You tried to send him to prison because you couldn't stand that we were happy. You did this to yourselves." "Take him out," Harrison ordered. As the officers dragged a sobbing, protesting Richard out of my front door, Harrison turned to Evelyn. "Mrs. Caldwell," Harrison said coldly, "you are not under arrest tonight. However, given your corroborated involvement in the extortion attempt, I strongly suggest you remain in the state. We will be in touch." Evelyn didn't say a word. She looked at Chloe one last time, found no mercy there, and practically ran out the front door, leaving her purse behind on the floor. When the door finally clicked shut, the silence in the house was deafening. Harrison sighed, rolling his shoulders to release the tension. He looked at me and extended his hand. "Well, David," Harrison said, a ghost of a smile returning to his face, "I'd say that concludes the counterintelligence investigation. Your clearance remains active. See you back at the skiff on Monday." The morning after the arrest, our house felt fundamentally different. The oppressive, invisible weight that had been suffocating Chloe and me for years had simply vanished, carried out the front door in federal handcuffs. Agent Harrison's team stayed until 3 a.m., conducting a thorough forensic sweep of our property. They recovered the flash drive from the glove box of Richard's leased BMW, which was parked conspicuously on our street. They also brought in a cyber team to execute a remote, secure wipe of Richard's iCloud account, permanently destroying the images of the Project Chimera ledgers before they could auto-sync to any of his other devices. By Monday morning, I was back in Skiff Room 4. Brenda Hopkins, the facility security officer, gave me a rare, approving nod as I walked past her office, but true to form, we never spoke of the incident again. My clearance was fully restored, and the project moved forward without a hitch. For Richard, however, time had stopped entirely. He was held without bail at the Alexandria City Jail. In the federal justice system, the Eastern District of Virginia is colloquially known as the rocket docket because of how terrifyingly fast cases move from indictment to trial. Richard was completely out of his depth. He had spent his entire adult life talking his way out of trouble, relying on our mother-in-law to bail him out of failed business ventures and bad debts. But you cannot smooth-talk the Department of Justice, especially when they have you on high-definition audio and video committing federal extortion and admitting to violations of the Espionage Act. I attended his arraignment a few weeks later. Chloe chose to stay home. She had seen enough. Sitting in the austere, wood-paneled courtroom, I watched as U.S. Marshals led Richard in. He was wearing a shapeless, dark green jumpsuit. He looked pale, gaunt, and absolutely terrified. The arrogant smirk was completely gone, replaced by the trembling lip of a man who had finally realized the universe did not revolve around his ego. His high-priced defense attorney, paid for by the last remnants of Evelyn's gutted retirement fund, tried to argue that Richard was simply a concerned citizen who had misunderstood the documents. He tried to paint Richard as an incompetent but well-meaning whistleblower. The assistant United States attorney didn't even break a sweat. She simply submitted the transcript of the dining room recording, highlighting the exact moment Richard demanded $250,000 to delete the photos. "Your Honor," the federal prosecutor stated flatly, "the defendant bypassed a secure government lock, stole classified defense data, and used it to extort a cleared contractor. He is not a whistleblower. He is a national security liability who attempted to hold the United States government's proprietary data hostage for a payday." The judge denied bail, facing the reality of a lengthy trial and potentially decades in federal prison. Richard's bravado shattered completely. 3 months later, he took a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to 1 count of unauthorized possession of national defense information and 1 count of extortion. The judge sentenced him to 72 months in a medium-security federal correctional institution in Cumberland, Maryland, 6 years, Evelyn didn't escape the blast radius either. Because she was present during the extortion and actively encouraged it on the recording, she was indicted as an accessory. To avoid jail time, she accepted a plea arrangement that placed her on 5 years of federal probation. Between the legal fees for her own defense and the astronomical retainers she paid trying to save Richard, she was completely bankrupted. She had to sell her house and move into a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Richmond. She tried to call Chloe a few times after the sentencing, leaving tearful, manipulative voicemails begging for forgiveness, claiming she was just misled by Richard. Chloe never answered. She changed her phone number and blocked Evelyn's email addresses. The severance was absolute. It has been 2 years since that bizarre, terrifying week. Project Chimera successfully launched, securing a vital piece of the country's aerospace defense network. I received a significant promotion, and Chloe used the peace and quiet to finally start the landscape architecture business she had always dreamed of. We adopted a golden retriever, renovated our kitchen, and filled our weekends with hiking and quiet dinners instead of agonizing over family drama. Sometimes, when I am locking up my secure briefcase for the night, I think about Richard. I think about the sheer, blinding arrogance it took to look at a locked federal safe and decide that whatever was inside was his ticket to easy money. He wanted to play the hero. He wanted to expose me as a fraud and take everything I had built. Instead, he exposed himself. He handed the federal government the shovel, showed them exactly where to dig, and then willingly jumped into the hole. We sleep very soundly these days. The house is quiet, the locks are secure, and the only secrets I keep are the ones that keep the country safe.